think we should make a start. Carol, do you want to join me? Just want to offer a warm welcome to everybody and let you know we'll be kicking off soon.
Hello, Lucy. Good evening.
Hello, so good to see you. I think you should, we're in your home, we're in your museum, so I think you should have the opening words, please.
Welcome. Are we starting now or?
I think we should get going. We've got lots to pack in, so I think let's crack on.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you, Lucy. Hello, everyone. It's so wonderful to see you all online. I'm very excited to welcome you all to this event. First of all, congratulations to colleagues at After All on the publication of Art and Its Worlds. I have not only been a long-term reader of After All, but a recent contributor to After All's publication. At the Inside Art Museum, we have recently presented a display of the series of exhibition histories by After All, which gives us a very rich survey of some of the key exhibitions that have left their marks on the history of global art. I still remember back in 2019, when Lucy and I met up in Glasgow, we started to talk about the possibility of presenting this rich body of knowledge generated through such an incredible network of exhibition makers, artists, historians, and researchers at the Inside Art Museum. While this project has taken a little longer than we had anticipated, and unfortunately, no one from After All team could travel to Beijing for this project, I'm still very happy that we managed to see it through and make it happen. So I want to thank everyone at After All and also my team of Huang Wenlong and Zhou Boya for your great work. As it is stated in the introduction to this new volume of After All, Art and Its World, this exhibition Histories was initiated as an effort to counter the neoliberal imperatives that marketize the art, research, and education in our lives, insisting on the modified production of objects, outputs, and qualifications. In today's art world, which is hijacked by the logic of so-called creative industry or art industry, museum practices too are very much dictated and misguided by market standards. In this past decade, despite the considerable number of museums, both private and public, being built and created in China, there has been very little consideration going into the content and curatorial vision of a museum, not to mention any social responsibility or cultural ambitions. The practice that we have developed at the Inside Art Museum in the past 10 years, especially in the past 5 years, is a conscious resistance to the overwhelming tendency to marketize museum practices, to ask for immediate outcomes, whether in terms of museum size, monumental architecture, audience numbers, or in terms of the number of star artists promoted and provided by mega commercial galleries. In our exhibition discursive publishing programs, a central concern is art history. We insist on bringing a historical perspective into the discourse of contemporary art. The contemporary art community in China is generally informed by a sense of rupture from anything before 1976. This historicized tendency creates ignorance on art history, as well as an avant-garde narrative of contemporary art in China informed by Western perspective. We lack a more nuanced and close reading of actual historical processes in relation to the ideological underlying in China. We pay very close attention to undercurrents and intellectual motivations behind artistic practices and movements. Through our exhibition programs, we revisit certain historical periods, as well as survey shows of forgotten artistic figures to generate new readings and methods of analysis of artworks and art events, as opposed to an art historical narrative centralizing successful characters, iconic artworks, and mainstream art movements. In the meantime, through years of working in the field, I'm acutely aware that many specialized trainings, basic skills, and understanding of different aspects of working in the art are lacking both inside and outside of our academies in general. At the museum, we play a role in generating a discourse about curatorial practice and exhibition making. By inviting curators, artists, and exhibition makers to share their experiences and understanding of the role of a curator, we are building up a body of knowledge for the discipline and foreground curatorial work as a form of creative practice, as opposed to just being organizers or administrators. For these two very reasons, I'm very honored to bring the voices and practices of After All exhibition histories into my museum, and I'm very much looking forward to tonight's discussion. Back to you, Rosie. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. That was super interesting and a really great intro to your whole project. I'm going to introduce the book now, the latest book in the Exhibition History series, and I'm going to share my screen, so I've got a couple of slides. But I'm going to whiz through because, as we know, it's almost impossible to capture a book in a couple of minutes of presentation, but let me try. So first of all, my thank yous to you, Carol, also to your curatorial team, Scarly and Wenlong. It's been a pleasure working on the exhibition with you. And I want to thank all our partners on Exhibition Histories, who you'll see mentioned in a slide in just a moment. So the book we're launching today is book 12 in the Exhibition History series. It's Art in Its Worlds, as Carol mentioned. And we're looking at exhibitions, institutions, and art becoming public, as you can see, around the world. Sorry, as you can see in the subtitle here, exhibitions, institutions, and art becoming public around the world and since the late 1980s. And the book is co-edited with my After All colleagues, Charles Escher, Bo Choi, and David Morris, and we're all here to answer your questions today. So please don't hesitate. Whatever you want to ask, we want to answer. So this just quickly want to flag the books that we've produced so far. So these are the ones that are preceding. And Carol mentioned she'd worked with us and she contributed brilliantly to last year's volume on exhibitions in Shanghai in the year 2000. Let me jump into the new book to tell you a little bit about what's newly available in the latest volume. Here it is, and it's an anthology. So all our essays and all our books, excuse me, are multivocal, but this one has an exceptionally large number of contributors. There are 33 people who contributed, and they're all researchers with a really eclectic background. So some identify as historians, some theorists, some critics, some artists and curators. And everybody's looking at something different, whereas most of our books zoom into a show, a cluster of shows. This one, it's much more wide-ranging. And the core of the book is a number of essays published in After All Journal in the first 10 years that we were producing the Exhibition Histories books. So in a way, this volume brings together everything that we were doing around the books before this one. And it brings them together in one place. But it's not, so there's no essays from previous books anthologized here, just essays produced by After All concurrently with the previous books. But we haven't just anthologized existing material. We've also commissioned new artists, curators, authors to contribute. And I'm just going to highlight 5 of the new commissions quickly for you now. So 33 contributors, I'm only mentioning 5 new ones. So apologies for brevity. This is just a sampling. So here you can see John Tain is zooming into the significance of an initiative in Hong Kong in July 1989 called Object Activities. And that's one of the new commissions. Another of the commissions, let me just go, see if I can, that's more of object activities. Another of the new commissions was contributed by Zi Kongyang, and she was looking at 3 art events in rural North and Northwest Chinese contexts in the early 1990s, particularly asking after the publics that they convened and reflecting on the complexities of situating local practice within a global field. Let me zoom on to another new commission. Chung Dai-vo writes on Viva XCon, the Visayas Islands Visual Arts Exhibition and Conference, which was initiated in the archipelago of the Philippines in the 1990s and carries on. Luisa Proença uses the figure of the devil and diabolical forces to write about an exhibition staged between Europe and Latin America, which was aiming to highlight the role of art in colonial modern ideology. And Kairani Barocca addresses the ableism and colonialism typically concealed as if a common good in the name of art becoming public, with a specific focus on activity in and regarding Indonesia. So that was a whistle-stop tour through 5 of the new commissions, just flagging the variety of contributors and topics covered in the book. I'm now going to highlight another 5 contributions to the book, and these are all visually led or visually anchored, and this is something I'm really proud of in this book. We've put the visual center stage in an important way, I think. And given time, I'm just going to whiz through. I'm just going to show you some of the visuality of the book. So this is Antonia Ajebe's contribution from Chimurenga in Cape Town. This is artist Naeem Mohammad's contribution regarding Chobi Mela Photography Biennial. The next 2 images are a visual verbal exchange by the curator of the last Sydney Biennial, artist Brooke Andrew, and historian Anthony Gardner. So that's a dialogue, a co-authored piece, a co-visually produced piece by them. And there's a visual essay by Bo Choi, who you'll meet in a moment, working with the Woman Manifesto in the Asia Art Archive resources. Sort of an artistic response to the visual material she finds there. And there's a visual essay that we all sort of collectively authored between After All and Asia Art Archive on cities on the move. We looked at the public, the exhibition Cities on the Move at large in the public realm. I could say more, but I'm not going to. I think it's important we wrap up and crack on with more content from other people before we go to questions. So I'm just going to flag how we've structured the book. I've sampled the book for you. I just want to indicate how we divided it into sections. So the first section of the book is called Making Art Global, and we have a question mark here, which is important to us. This question emerges from 10 years of making books in the exhibition history series, and it's really asking how the local and the global are communicated and addressed by art exhibitions in different places in different times, without presuming that the global is even possible to be addressed. It's impossible to address in everybody. Second section of the book is artist / curator / other. And this is looking at how the exhibition form for art has been experimented with by any number of agents in the contemporary art field. So there's a particular focus here on collective artist-led initiatives. And the question mark here is asking whether it's clear what the division of roles is between the artist or the curator or somebody else. Third section of the book looks at institutional histories. And this is where we gather contributions that particularly focus on how exhibitions connect with or develop into longer term projects, either through becoming recurring events, becoming instituent practices, or explicitly institution building. And this is something that we're moving towards in the book series, away from just the ephemeral event, looking more at the structures that allow art to become public on a sustainable basis. Final text I'm going to flag is actually the introduction. So I'm going to end at the beginning. This is a text that we co-authored between us, and it really sets up what we've tried to do with exhibition histories in the past 10 years. It takes stock and it looks to the future. And just to quote one sentence from it, it announces something I feel very passionately. It says, in some ways, we seek to rethink what exhibition histories might be every time we make a book. And I mean that wholeheartedly. We really do rethink. And if the core idea of this new book is that art dilates and complicates and conjures entire worlds, then it's also key that our worlds are shared and overlap and interrelate. So each time we make a book in the exhibition history series, we reimagine what exhibition histories might be, because we work with new people with different ideas each time. And on that note, I'm going to end, as I started, with some thanks to all of our collaborators on Exhibition Histories, all the authors, artists, curators, historians we've worked with, our partners, our publishing partners, and I also want to thank in anticipation, all of our contributors to come. Right, I hope I've not claimed too much of your time. I'm going to hand over to Wenlong and Scarly now, who are going to give us a tour of the exhibition right now in the Inside Out Art Museum in Beijing.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Carol. And my name is Wenlong, and this is my colleague, Scarly. And we are both from Beijing Inside Out Art Museum. So this is a great opportunity for us to learn the practices of exhibition histories, and the editorial team has been very responsive to make this dialogue happen. And we also want to thank Bo for her contribution to design this exhibition with us. We also want to thank Andrew to design the poster, and we want to thank Mai Yi to design the visual elements in the space.
We're really excited to learn about the exhibitions that these 12 books bring on the table. Some of them are well-known, some are understudied. Reading through these archives, photos of exhibition view, and essays written years after the events pushes us to think over the various formats and the possibility of exhibition making.
The Inside Out practice is a project initiated by Carol. This is a project dedicated to art publication related people and project. This episode, we focus on after our exhibition histories. And now we were gonna share screen. Now we will start our virtual tour of this exhibition in Beijing. And Art and Its Word is an anthology of a decade-long retrospective of after-war exhibition histories work. The design and the name of this anthology is very inspiring. They are both independent and also connected exhibition practices, and they are equally important, and they each have their own world. We borrow this idea and use it in our poster design and the title of this show. Each publication is a case study of one or several exhibitions. We also print out the statement of exhibition histories. It is mostly the same statement from 2010 to 2020. Well, since 2020, the editorial team rephrased their wording completely. We would like to address this transformation. It highlights the multiple voices and critical perspectives. And it also focuses on the necessity to constantly redefine our understanding of art, exhibition, and history. For visualizing the history of exhibition histories, we divide the publication into 3 thematic groups. We use non-expensive materials such as printed A4 paper, magnets, bulletin board for presentation, so that the research results are not like a canon, but rather materials in a university setting. Books can be moved around and can be compared between each other.
Visualizing the books with like such a rich content can be a problem. So what we do here is that we extract the books, like what we think is the most representative, and we try to make this the display in accord with the original context of the exhibitions.
The first group is under the title Why Exhibition. This is to show the starting point of this research series. As a project based in London, it shines a new light on cases of early practices in Western Europe and North America. The first book, exhibiting the new art, Opulus Shadow-Even and When Attitudes Become Form in 1969, reviews 2 exhibitions that were organized on the same year, one in Amsterdam and the other in Bern. The book highlights the late 1960s when art production can happen not only in the studio, but also in the gallery space, and it can even go beyond the normal white box. The second book, from Conceptualism to Feminism, Lucy Lippard's Numbers Show 1969 to 1974, shows how Lucy Lippard developed a series of exhibitions that took place outside major art centers like New York, and it also involves non-object-centered art. Most importantly, this research also brings in the context of gender studies. This series of exhibitions happened at the same moment compared to the 2 curatorial projects that I just mentioned. So they are put They're being put side by side in the space. The third book, Exhibition, Design, Participation, and Exhibit 1957 and Related Projects. It presents the exhibition of Richard Hamilton and Victor Posmo. Their practices very much blur the line between artist and curator. I quote, "An exhibit is a way of accepting the limited conditions of an exhibition and overcoming them to make a drama of space that involves the spectator. Artists can become curators, and curators become the co-worker of artists." The three books show how art practices evolved in the 1960s when they were no longer media specific. And this also introduced new role of curator and new curatorial approaches. In our space, the second group of books that we have is Making Global Art? In this group, we can observe the researches of exhibition histories on global phenomenon of art exhibitions, but we still need to ask if the concept of global art is valid, or does this practice confirm the persistence of this division in light of how exhibition was perceived in public in reality. In this group, we have Magicien de la Terre in Paris in 1989, serves as the base of curatorial discussion of international and transnational art exhibition. However, before this book, what exhibition histories published first is rather the third Havana Biennale in the same year. This biennial illustrates the shift from Venice Biennale's model, namely national representation, to a more up-to-date curatorial authorship that is usually relevant to the world's political and social issues. In the space, we also present the name of all participating artists to show the diversity of the artists.
So we used a large-size printed out anthropophagic manifesto to present the 24th Brazil Biennial. The curator articulated this biennial around the manifesto, which proposed a kind of compatibility when interacting with the European modern world and highlight the cultural subjectivity of Brazil. The text itself is very powerful, and this Chinese version has a detailed annotation so people can understand the context better. And the text remains to be an inspiration in a Western-dominated art world. And that is the section where we present uncooperative contemporaries, art exhibitions in Shanghai in 2000. We lay out the voices from artists and curators like Zheng Shentian, who participated in the 2000 Shanghai Biennale. And this is what we found very interesting in the exhibition history series, that they would bring out like multiple voices from people who are on site together in a reflective perspective that really gives you a new angle to look back at the event. And the next session is our becoming public section. The practices discussed in these four books are very much context-based. They are not tailored to be displayed in institutions, but oriented towards local audiences. Artworks and events were placed and held everywhere. We want to display them in a way that resonates with the original context of these exhibitions. So on the billboard, we placed the poster of Chicago Cultural in Action Public Art Project in the center and mapped out all 8 events happening from 1992 to 1993. These events include surveys, social activities, year-long researches, and people like students, factory workers were involved. We would love that the audience can have an instant sense that these various events were happening at the same time in different parts of the city. So we use this billboard. On the other side of the billboard is a music stand, which holds the book of Festec 77. Festec 77 bring together abundant documents, archival pictures, reports of the second World Black and African Festival of Arts and Culture that took place in Lagos. As you can see, the size of the book is really large and it's really heavy. So we use this music stand also because there were many musical events in the festival, and you can see many questions around musical performance in the post-event questionnaire. We hope the music stand can somewhat imply it. So just a few steps forward, you can see pictures and books scattered on the floor. This is a space we exhibit Chiang Mai social installations from 1992 to 1998. We print out some of the event photos, as you can see. There's a close connection between all the artworks and events and the public sphere people live in. One of the photos showed how artists decorate the booths with Buddhist saying, so artworks are accessible to people passing by. We hope that audience could sit here in a very relaxing atmosphere and to have a look at these events as if they were just in the art scene. These are the photos of the Chiang Mai social installations and the book pages in there. So at this corner, you can see apt art. From 1982 to 1984, apt art was an artist-to-artist institutionalization of unofficial art gathering in Moscow. At that time, due to the censorship and lack of institution, it is almost impossible to hold exhibitions. They would use an apartment as exhibition space and hold a sequence of shows in an apartment and outdoors. We kind of simulate the way they hang pictures on the wall. We made this domestic setting, and instead of artworks, we present the archival pictures from multiple exhibitionary events organized by apt art. So this is an overview of the Making Art Public section. As you can see, it was placed just beside the glass window from where you can see people walking and playing out there. These events were held outside of institutions either because they did not have the conditions for institutional exhibitions or because they were not satisfied with the model of institutions and were determined to engage individuals, audiences, and communities into the production and redefinition of art in the way of collaborative work and social practice. And let's take a final look of our exhibition space. Yeah, that would be all.
Thank you, Wenlong. Thank you, Scarly. Are you handing over to me now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. And hi, everyone. My name is David, and I'm here with Bo. Hi, from London. It's really good to be here. So I'm just appearing to briefly introduce the next part of the event, which is a screening. And this is a video by S.A. Atubu, who is a third-year student at Central St. Martin's. And she is studying culture, criticism, and curation. And this video was in the planning of the exhibition that we just saw there. This video was sort of flagged by Wenlong and Scarly as part of our discussions to sort of highlight the connection to education and learning and teaching with the exhibition histories work that we do. And so, as well as being a research fellow at, after all, I'm also co-leader with Elena Villalta of the exhibition studies MRS program here, research masters program. And that's, you know, the students are a real sort of sounding board and source of inspiration for the research that we do. And this feels like a very important aspect to convey. And so we got in touch with S.A. about this video, and she immediately offered to translate it into Chinese, which we were bowled over by and very excited by. And what you'll see now is a kind of a work in progress. So the subtitles have been translated by S.A. And the plan is to produce a fully voice-overed version in Chinese, which will be featured in the exhibition, and we hope online as well in the months to come. And so S.A. will be available. She's in the Zoom chat here and is here to answer your questions in the Q&A box as well. So please do, if you have any questions about the video, ask her. And so yeah, I think now we will screen the video, I should also give thanks to Janine Francois, a colleague here, in whose teaching program this essay, this video essay first emerged. And so thank you, essay. And without further ado, let's screen the video.
This is Irabo Emokpai. He was a Nigerian artist who worked in 2D and 3D art, most of which were paintings, sculptures, and mosaics. Throughout his fine art career, he also worked in advertising, eventually becoming creative director of Lintas, a West African firm. He was my grandfather. From his arrival in Lagos in 1954, newly married, Emokpai proved himself to be a purposeful and versatile artist. He used his advertising work at Lintas to support his family, but also continued his own artistic practice and became a well-known artist in the Lagos scene. During the 1970s, a watershed came in Emokpai's career. He was tasked with creating the look of Festac 77, the second World Black and African Festival of Arts and Culture, a month-long, city-wide celebration of Blackness that Lagos had never seen the like of. His work for Festac was so extensive that Emokpai created a company just for this event, Asa Productions, named after his eldest son and operated from an attic workshop in his home. Emokpai's contributions to the festival can be broken down into 3 parts. 1. The poster. A simple graphic design, well within the artist's comfort zone. A black and white image of the now iconic Idia ivory mask, lit to create a striking chiaroscuro. Around this is the official title of the festival, and above is its nickname, Festac 77, both written in fonts that Emokpai designed himself. It's simple and effective. Emokpai chose the image of Queen Idia not only because of its beauty and powerful gaze, but because of the subject's significance in Edo culture and how unknown this piece was in the wider world. Queen Idia was the mother of Oba Esige, ruler of Benin from 1504 to 1550. She was a warrior so formidable that her son gave her the title Ioba, meaning Queen Mother, and built her Igwe-Oba, Palace of the Queen Mother, just outside Benin City. Unfortunately, the ivory pendant mask of Queen Idia, a prized component in the Oba's regalia, was looted by the British in 1897. The Nigerian government tried to negotiate the return of this mask for Festac, but was denied access. Here's a few words Emokpai had to say about that.
Because when the Nigerian government was trying to bring this symbol in order to show it during Festac, the British Museum wanted £2 million as insurances, for releasing it, just for letting us have it for a short time. And this I found terribly immoral, because in the first place, this item was stolen from us. It was stolen from the palace of the Oba of Benin. As of right, it belongs to the Oba of Benin, and it should be restored to him, because it is part of his paraphernalia, and it should remain so, not to be lost or locked up in one little box in Europe where they don't even know the meaning of it. They only appreciated the aesthetic attraction, the value of it aesthetically, but they do not understand the spiritual value of that piece of work. And I think rightly that that work should be returned.
You can tell this meant a lot to him. A son of Eweka Gusadoba of Benin, Emokpai was extremely proud of his Edo heritage, so much so that he took a treasured piece of Bini culture and presented it as a symbol of universal blackness across the globe. 2. The National Arts Theatre. As a member of the Society of Nigerian Artists, Emokpai was among a group that campaigned for a national theatre and a national gallery. In the lead up to Festac, their wish was granted. A theatre was commissioned by Yakubu Gowon's regime and completed under Olusegun Obasanjo in 1976, just in time to be opened during the festival. The theatre is a unique building, designed by Bulgarian construction company Techno Expostroy to resemble the Palace of Sports and Culture in Varna. Its sickle shape is widely viewed to echo that of a soldier's cap, a reminder of Nigeria's past as a military government. This theatre was to be the cherry on top of the new landscape that emerged in 1977, with the creation of a housing village for foreign guests in a district that is still called Festac today. Emokbai's role in all of this was to adorn the theatre's facade. The first of these adornments is a frieze, which wraps around the building. Depicted in this relief sculpture are abstract designs and clusters of black bodies, culminating in the centerpiece, a carving of Queen Idia, flanked by two sections of a golden world map. Underneath this are the mosaics. The theatre has 4 entrances and 2 mosaics at each. Emokbai created 6 of these. These ones I see as depictions of energy, or something cellular, the building blocks of life, something that symbolizes energetic origins. Circles of red, black, blue, yellow, green, white, all floating in glittering gold fluid, like a celestial bloodstream. This is a celebration of sound. On this side are those circles from before, shifting into pointed shapes suggestive of traditional masks. These curvilinear shapes flatten out into colorful lines, emerging in its twin mosaic here, and this shape that looks like the mouth of a trumpet. I interpret these more linear forms as a visualization of sound. These 2 mosaics seem to be an allegory of the creation of music. Now the last 2. An abstracted figure bangs on a drum, and even further abstracted shapes suggest human forms in motion. This mosaic is paired with another, in which form has again been broken down to suggest movement through long curved lines and contrasting colors. All 6 mosaics show progression, from nascent life to the birth of music, to here, movement and dance. All the mosaics and the frieze were created in situ, which means Emokbai needed a studio nearby. So he established an open-air courtyard workshop on the theatre grounds, which he continued to use after the completion of his work there. The workshop is still used by a community of painters and sculptors today. Works of his and other prominent artists of the time are still on display in the theatre's galleries as part of the national collection. 3. The decorations. Another part of Emokbai's job was to create the decorations that were displayed all around Lagos. These decorations, in continuation of the theme, were giant, golden reproductions of the Queen Idia pendant mask. My mother told me about this image she has in her memories of Eko Bridge during that time. All the way down the bridge's 1,350 meters were giant golden Idias. They were positioned on every lamppost. She told me of how very proud she was of her dad when she saw how beautifully he had adorned the city. I keep going back to this image my mother described to me of the bridge, and the symbolism of it, which I doubt was lost to the artist. He positioned this symbol to connect Edo history to Nigerian history and to worldwide Black history all along Eko Bridge. A symbolic bridge on a physical bridge, overlooking the shiny new theatre that boasted a frieze that linked Idia to the whole world. You can almost taste the optimism. That's why seeing the theatre in a state of disrepair, with broken windows, 5 floors left unswept, and paintings crumbling in the gallery, makes the Nigerian government's neglect of art and culture even more devastating. My grandfather died young. In 1984, a few months shy of turning 50. I wish he had lived longer and I could have met him. But I'm also glad that he'll never see what has become of his labor of love. To be honest, I'm embarrassed that I showed how derelict the theatre is to those of you who aren't Nigerian. But if there's anything the last few months have taught me, it's that I don't need to protect Nigeria's image. All our dirty secrets should be aired. I see murals around Lagos with depictions of the theatre's facade, proudly displaying it. But you never see close-ups, never the interior. It's like the government's trying to trick us, boasting about their beautiful theatre from afar, but never up close, so they don't have to see the product of their neglect, the way they are slowly destroying beauty. I imagine what it must have felt like at the theatre's grand opening, what it must have been like to witness the electricity of its first performance, how my grandfather would have felt seeing the fruits of his labor taken in by what must have seemed to be every Black person in the entire world. I imagine all this, and it only makes our present reality all the more depressing. I know things were far from ideal back then. Not everyone was on board with Festac. Wole Soyinka thought the whole thing was reductionist, and Fela thought it was a scam. In 1966 and 77, when the festivals took place in Dakar and Lagos, it was probably even harder being Black. But it looked like they had a sense of optimism that seems a bit impossible nowadays. It must have felt like they were going somewhere. And it sucks to realize that we've moved so little.
Welcome, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You are welcome to Nigeria, where the Festac is taking place. Here in Nigeria, in Africa. Welcome, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You are welcome to Nigeria. Welcome, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You are welcome.
Should Lee and Scully now run the Q&A? Yeah. So we actually have a question to Otubu. We would like to know, is Otubu online? Is she online?
I say, are you there? You are, yes, you are.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Nice to see you over the Zoom. We would actually like to know, since you also, you've learned Chinese as well, right?
Yeah, I studied pre-U Chinese.
Yeah. So when you're adding this Chinese subtitle, it's like translating it to a new language, to a new audience. Do you have any new reflection when you were doing it?
So I did it in collaboration with one of my friends who's a native speaker. And we had like problems translating meaning, because I would say one word in English, but then it would be a whole sentence in Mandarin. And so we had to figure out how to find a balance between the kind of thing I said in English and making it short in Mandarin as well so the video could flow. For example, when I said that Wole Soyinka found it reductionist, she said that, you know, saying reductionist in Mandarin didn't make as much sense if we had to expand that word a bit.
Yeah, and my next question is, since the book the publication of Festac 77 is really different from the rest of the publication. It's mainly archive-based. Have you read the books, and what do you think?
The Festac 77 book?
Yeah.
I found it really interesting how they put all the different languages and like everything was there. They didn't necessarily target it to a specific audience based on language. It was whoever wanted to enjoy Festac could enjoy it based on, those Arabic, those French, those English. And I found that quite enjoyable, even though I don't speak those languages.
And there's also a question for you from John Tan. So he says, growing up, how familiar were you with the history of Festac and your grandfather?
So I didn't really know much about it growing up. I feel like it's not a part of culture that we talked about that much, even though it was so huge. That was something that later in life I had to discover, and then I was told about my grandfather's role in it, and it was so big. And I'm currently going through all his things in our attic at home, looking at all his posters the mock-up posters for Festac and all his plans and things. So it's really interesting, but I didn't know much growing up. It's so making this video was a real opportunity to learn all that.
Thank you, Asa. And we have more questions for the editorial team.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will start with a really simple one. So when I'm reading this anthology, I feel like this is a recap of all your 10-year research. So my first question is that how do you decide to divide it into these three parts, making up global, artist, curator, others, and institutional histories? And how do you decide what kind of essays do you want to newly commission? Thank you.
So I make a first stab and then everybody else jump in, please. I would say producing this book and deciding on the sections is the result of taking stock. When you turn 10, you hit double digits. You think, how have we got here? What have we done? And we have always commissioned each new book thinking what we've done already and what we can do differently in the future. And that's been our main rubric for commissioning, what else can we look at and how can we look at it differently? So it's always about moving somewhere else, doing something differently. We haven't been strategic in the sense we didn't start with 3 research questions and produce the first 10 books. We produced the first 10 books, always trying to go somewhere else, do something differently. And then hitting 10 years, looked back and realized we'd probably been addressing these 3 research questions. How is global contemporary art possible, and how has it been mobilized in the exhibition form? Who has been playing with the exhibition as a form? Artists, curators. How has exhibition as such been messed around with, experimented with? And then this idea of instituting and the relationship between exhibition and institution has emerged more recently in a way. We've already done books that are semi-institutions. Aptart, you mentioned, as one. Chiang Social Installation is another. These are iterative projects that almost become institutions in themselves. So that is, again, emerging from a taking stock, but it's also making explicit something we're committed to in the future, which is looking more at institutions that sustain exhibitions alongside exhibitions in themselves. But David, Bo, Charles, shout me down. Tell me something different if you don't agree. Of course, they're going to sit on mute now and let me hang it. Can I answer the question that came in from the chat? So we had a question about which book to recommend. And we were told not to pick Art in its Worlds, which of course is the one I want to recommend, because I do think it's a good place to start because it's kind of a summary. But for the purposes of properly answering a question and not taking that one, I'm picking this one. This is the one that we produced last year that Carol contributed to. And I'm picking it because we're addressing a Chinese context primarily today. It's looking at the Shanghai projects in the year 2000. But really, if I was honest, and when people ask me which book should I read first, I have to learn more about you. I have to find what you care about. Is it participation in art? Is it the sort of multinational coming together of contemporary art in one place and claiming to be global. I have to find out what you're interested in, maybe where you are, what you're interested in thinking about as a place and a context, as a period of time, and then we can answer the question. They're very eclectic, the books. So you have to follow your own interest when you dive in first. So that's the real answer. Happy to answer more specifically if you tell me what is gripping you about contemporary art now.
And so since no one is adding, so I'm going to the next question. So how your researches on exhibition history is related to the current art world and the practice of contemporary art?
So that has to go to Charles, I think. You have to address how exhibition histories relates to your curatorial institutional practice.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy, and thanks for the question. I thought you answered the other one well. I think that there's I think what's interesting is that the art world's really separating itself into a fairly robust commercial system, and something which is less robust, more precarious, which sees art as a possible research tool into the way we might live together, I suppose, in different ways, and how to depict that, and how to reflect on it, and how to represent it, and how maybe to call it into being. Yeah, there are lots of aspects in which art does that. And so I suppose from our point of view, the development of the series as well, and thinking about exhibition histories, has moved from a sort of integrated art world, which I think it was in those first books that you look in the exhibition in the late 1950s and 60s, and really up to the end of the 80s or so. There was a kind of integration in which there were common points of interest, common references, a common discourse across the art world as it was then, which was confined to a very small geography of Western Europe, so the non-socialist part of Europe at the time, and North America, with occasional input from elsewhere, but mostly of artists who would physically rehouse either to New York or at the earlier stage to Paris or whatever. So in that context, there was quite a degree of coherence. And I think what's interesting about our relationship to the rest of the art world as such is that we're now more and more focused on that world, which is which might engage with the commercial art world, but isn't really significant within it, I think. So it might be that we would look at it, but we don't have any significance within it. And I think that separation is I don't think it's necessarily anything to be mourned or anything like that. But I think that it does take account of where we're going, for instance, with institutional histories, where you start to look at how public institutions, particularly, or institutions that have a public mission, rather than a profit-taking mission, that those institutions, how they have developed their relationship, moved away from, or tried to move away from, a kind of elitist commonality with the commercial art world, and see whether they could communicate with the society that in a way allows them to exist in certain senses because of their publicness. So I think that's an interesting shift. I think that also comes out in the book to some extent, where we move from the art's sort of ambition to join the whole globalization process that opens up at the beginning of the 90s, a little bit earlier maybe in some cases, towards the questioning more of sort of longer term, sustainable, maybe even more modest attempts at what art might mean in particular contexts, to position it, to situate it, rather more than it was in the 90s. So I think that unfolding is part of this separation of a sort of commercial, universalist, modern, in a way, art world, and something else which is emerging more and is clarifying itself in terms of certain, I think, institutional parameters. And that trajectory is one that we're following, I think. I don't know how you see that, Lucy, or David, or Bo.
Yeah, should we pick it up? I'm conscious of time, so if there are more questions, we can respond to those. Scally, but I mean, there's plenty in what Charles said we could respond to as well. But
Oh, okay. Yeah, actually, when I was reading this introduction, I noticed that you've written that revisitation and polyvoices are like the key to your researches. So I kind of, and also like Lucy just mentioned that you were trying very different things. So I actually want to find out what's the takeaway of all this trying or like bringing different voices together. And also I've seen so many like interviews of when you would interview people who participated in the event, and they would have like very different opinions about like different events. So how do you feel about that? How does these kind of have an influence on your researches or your like initial judgment or feelings about certain exhibition events?
Thank you for the question. It's a really good one. I mean, I think the sort of the polyvocal, as you put it, and collective process is really a fundamental part of both how we understand, you know, the exhibition and the institution and these projects that we're looking at, and it's also, you know, fundamental to the process of how we, you know, how we explore them in the research and in the publications that we produce. So I'm going to take my turn at picking a favorite, though Lucy gave a really good answer to that. It really depends what you're interested in, but this Artist to Artist, which we produced in collaboration with a great many people and lead edited by David Tay, is very strongly based upon oral history. And this was, I think, probably the most, this book at the time was the most sort of collectively produced and most discursively produced book in the series so far, though I think it has had a part to play in all of the books we've produced. And so Chiang Mai Social Installation was a series of festivals in North Thailand in the 90s that were largely historicized locally through word of mouth, through kind of rumors and gossip and art scene kind of you know, discussions. And so we tried to find a way to, you know, honor that to a certain degree in the book itself. So there's a very extended kind of oral history at the center of the book, along with kind of different archives from participants and others. So I think this book is a particularly kind of good example of the polyvocal in relation to what we try to do, though. I mean, all of the books sort of perform that, I think, to different degrees as well. They're all multiply authored. They all involve a great deal of kind of you know, collaborative research and discussion. I wondered, Bo, if you wanted to. So we, in terms of the other types of, like, you know, exploring different processes as well. Maybe you want to say something about Womanifesto and Cities on the Move, because that was a sort of slightly new departure for us in the new book, where we were producing more kind of we were responding to archives in the case of Womanifesto and Cities on the Move, and finding a different register, I suppose, to think about how those events are historicized.
Yeah, I think from Womanifesto and Cities on the Move point of view, then these visual essays, suppose looking at how do we open up this people's understanding of history via images, and how can we evoke a sense of maybe perhaps being there, the being there-ness of exhibition history, and how, you know, except from voices and stories and essays, how do we achieve that? And that's, I guess, is what we're trying to do with the visual essays in the new book. Conveniently in front of me. Yeah, so I think, David, you also participated in the selection of the images for Cities on the Move. I think during the process, we're also trying to tease out, like, what are the key themes, how we kind of trying to imagine ourselves in the city, in Bangkok at the time, and how the different themes come about, and then trying to navigate through the city through the different themes of that were emergent in the exhibition. And for Womanifesto, I think it's also the time of putting those together, still during the pandemic, and it was this sense of, like, also looking through the archives and how, you know, this sense of touch and this sense of physicality of being together, the togetherness of the event became quite important. So that was, of course, then also thinking of Women in Festo that happened at the time and reflecting of what it could become right now was also part of the thinking of the selection process.
Yeah, absolutely. Trying to bring it alive for the present, or reimagine it in the present moment.
Yeah.
David, I'm going to take a question about art history because I always cop the art history questions. But then there's one you might want to take that Wings posted. So I'm just going to, there was a question about the relationship between exhibition history and art history. And then a question, I think, maybe about the Shanghai context and the role of the art world and art history in Shanghai in 2000. So just to say very quickly, we always talk about exhibition histories as a field rather than a discipline. So as an art historian, you might bring your discipline to the field of exhibition histories, but we're quite keen that it's not only written by art historians, that it's also written by curators, writers, people who, I mean, in the case of Antonio Jabe, DJs or editors. So that's how I see the relationship between those two terms, art history and exhibition history. But with specific relation to Shanghai, I want to be clear that this book looks at the Shanghai Biennale, so the third Biennale that takes place in the year 2000, but also artist-led initiatives that bubble up in the city at the time. And rather than just asking who made it into art history through the vehicle of these exhibitions, we're really asking what's the nature of the public that's convened in these different contexts, in the Biennale context and in the artist-led within the artist-led initiatives. So it's really a question about art meeting publics rather than a question about who enters a canon, a national canon, a global canon through the act of exhibiting.
Were you going to hand over to me?
Yeah, do you mind, David?
I'm trying. There's some good questions in the Q&A box. So
I missed
about
those.
how we teach exhibition history, and I'll answer briefly, but I think as expansively as possible is that. So we try and think of the exhibition as not being a sort of you know, a white cube thing or anything in particular. So students often bring quite unusual understandings of what could be understood by an exhibition, from the sort of field recordings of Alan Lomax in the United States to a current student who's working on pipelines between Europe and North Africa, and thinking about, you know, exhibition and how those play into sort of logics of, you know, exhibitionary logics and visualization, and the kind of long history of modernity and coloniality. So we try to not be too prescribed in terms of what exhibitions and exhibition history is and could be. And we're quite lucky in that I think it's the only program I know of, at least in the UK, that focuses on research rather than practice. So it's very much sort of, it's interested in, you know, how things could be done differently rather than, you know, how exhibitions are made under current conditions, so to speak. And the question about working with authors on reprinting their writing written for an earlier context and time. Yeah, I mean, this was an interesting one because in some cases we did have to reframe somewhat the content in order to make it, you know, clear that it was addressing a particular moment. But I think all of the texts that were chosen for the book were chosen for their timeliness. So they all felt like they had a sense of relevance and urgency for the present, which is why they entered the anthology for the present and, you know, the futures that we are sort of entering into.
So some of I think the earliest texts are from 2009. So obviously they speak to that moment then, and the moment has changed, has moved on. So there was some, if there wasn't a postscript added, there was some just tweaking so that the now that was referenced was clearly a historical now. But I would reiterate what David said. They were included because they are still relevant, even though the moment has moved. We're at time. Have we missed, is there anything we can quickly slide in that we've missed?
Yeah. So, wait.
Charles, do you want to answer archiving curating? How do you archive your practice?
There's a lot of, we have this sort of archive fever already diagnosed in the 1990s. No, so I think that it's still going on. But I do notice that the curatorial archives are becoming an issue. I'm asked a few times about that, and I mean, personally, I don't really have one. I mean, you probably do have one despite yourself, but it's not something that's been ever significant in collecting it. But I think some other curators are very, very concerned about archives and assemble things. And as Harold Zeeman has a huge library in Switzerland, and I think Obrist also, and things like that. So very much concerned about their own legacy. But I do think that I do think it would be a shame if we became obsessed with our own histories in that way as curators. And I can speak for us. I do. One of the things that I think is interesting is that there's a shift in the position of the curator, at least in these public institutions rather than the commercial ones, which is, I've certainly seen a move from the place of the curator being between the artist and the institution that they're working for, so often sort of negotiating the artist's wishes. And that became, in the course of time, a place between not just the artist, but even more significantly, I think, the collector and the gallerist and the institution, and negotiating that relationship. And I think that where the interesting things around curating are happening now are more in what might have been called mediation or education before, and it's much more between the institution and a kind of public or publics, however that wants to be defined. And I think that line is more interesting. So the kind of archives that would emerge from the one are the sort of gossipy archives about the internal politics of the art world, if you like. And the other one would maybe emerge in terms of a set of knowledges that are rather differently placed, both in terms of mediation, but also in terms of the role of the art institution within a much wider ecosystem of public institutions that try to defend certain ideas of democracy or free exchange, or of the possibility of art being something that contributes to an open society. So I think that role becomes more significant than it was in the 90s. If we go back further, then it had another role, of course, with the Cold War. But if we take just the 90s period, I think that shift in the interesting position of the curatorial of the curator maybe will reflect on the different kinds of archives that might emerge, and different kinds of discourses and references that are located. Art history in a way becomes maybe less of the canonical system which curators refer to, and we might find a more kind of mediation history or even exhibition history as being those elements. I think that's where the shift is happening as well, between art in a closed system in a way with the institution, and something which is connected to mediation and to the traditional roles in museums that are occupied by the education department also. That's my feeling, that the archive might be done. But I think it would be a shame if curators became more conscious of the archive than doing things. That's also important.
That's really nice, because you're getting agreement from the person that asked you. I've typed a very swift answer to a question that came in, because I think we should wrap now. I'm worried about going over. Please tell me if I'm policing it too strictly and what people feel. We can also answer live. Maybe Scarly and Wenlong, you must tell us what the expectation is, whether we should behave and wrap up. Yeah, go for it, Dave.
I also answered the theory question, and Bo told me everything is theory.
According to Tom McCarthy, yeah, everything is theory.
Everything is theory, everything is practice.
No, we would love to hear your answer, Lucy. I think that from that we will wrap up.
I think theory is super important, but I think theory is also super open. I would say politics drives the history as much as theory, but then politics and theory are totally imbricated. And I like David bringing in practice. I mean, all these things are super important to me. Research, practice, history, theory, politics, they're all something that you build for yourself in dialogue with others, that you live and breathe through conversations with others. And we only decide where to do a deep dive historically through the history and theory, the politics that we share with those that we're in conversation with. So all we can do is expand our network of interlocutors. in order to steer our future research. Which is why it's nice to be in dialogue with more colleagues today.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so let's wrap up.
Yeah.
We're already like exceed 10 minutes, so thank you.
We were quite obedient.
Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for after all editorial team to come here, and we can meet online and have this opportunity to talk about these questions.
And thank you for the exhibition as well. And I wanted to say I really like the name. I think that's very appropriate. The Inside Out Museum. I think that's a really appropriate way of thinking about what the role museums can play, or museums like yours can play in terms of analysing something at another level. So yeah, thanks a lot for the exhibition.
Thank you for having the dialogue.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.